Hey everybody, welcome to day two of our study through Psalm 23. Um, verse 2 says, He makes me lie down in green pastures, He leads me beside quiet waters. So, the first kind of takeaway from verse 2 is that, David is saying that he's a sheep and that the Lord is his shepherd and he makes him lie down. So, for those of us who do not shepherd and those of us who do not have a whole lot of knowledge about sheep, I did not know this, but sheep are not prone to laying down. It takes very specific uh, characteristics or very specific requirements need to be met for sheep to feel the contentment or the freedom to lie down, and that's because they are defenseless animals, and so they are. When left to their own devices, they are constantly worried and ridden with anxiety, and can be scared by this and startled by the slightest thing. So the fact that David says that the Lord is my shepherd and he makes me lie down implies that he receives great contentment and assurance from the Lord as his shepherd. And so I'm going to go over the 4 requirements that our author tells us have to be met in order for a sheep to feel safe enough or content enough to lay down. So the first thing is freedom from fear of predators, outside predators. So as I said before, a sheep's only defense is to run away, and that's literally all they can do. And so because of that, any small disturbance can frighten them. It doesn't matter what the disturbance is. If it is perceived as a threat or fear, then the sheep is going to run. And as we mentioned briefly yesterday, sheep have sort of this mob-like mentality. And so if one sheep is startled, the whole flock will run, regardless of the reality of danger or of a threat. And a good shepherd ensures that his sheep feel safe. So that means that he takes great care to make sure that predators can't get in, or that if there are predators out and about, he's going to be diligent to guard his flock day and night. And for me, I just think that's kind of interesting because I do, as we kind of explore more about, how we are like sheep, I do think of myself and think how often I'm scared by things just because other people are frightened by them. Whether that's an economic downturn, whether that's the state of the country, whether that is a perceived threat to my social status or my financial status. A lot of times things are way worse in my head than they are in reality, and that's because I'm like a sheep. So we see here in the psalm that uh, is if a sheep lies down, then that means that they have a freedom from fear of predators. The second requirement is that a sheep needs to be free from the fear of social tension. So again, something I did not know, but apparently in a flock, just kind of like how you would say in with chickens that there's like a pecking order. Apparently the same thing happens in a flock of sheep. Like there's one, or well, maybe not one, but there's a handful of dominant ewes or dominant sheep that will bully the rest of the flock into, subordinate. So if they come across a sheep that's laying on what they perceive as their turf, then they will literally headbutt the other sheep out of the way until it gives way and lets them, into their area of grass. So the sheep that fear this, obviously the ones that are being bullied, are obviously more anxious and are obviously unsettled. But The dominant sheep, according to our author, are also equally unhealthy. They're angry. They're constantly, kind of trying to protect their turf. So they're never calm and they're never content. They're always afraid that their hierarchy is going to be challenged, by another sheep. So a good shepherd ensures that his sheep feel safe. And so if you think about the fact of, or you think about a shepherd having a large flock, then, for him to notice when there is this sort of headbutting or bullying going on within his flock, he actually physically goes in and separates those things. And so the author actually gave some instances of times when he had to intercede on behalf of another sheep in his flock who was being bullied. And so, for me, that brings great comfort that that means the Lord must know me intimately. That we do often, in scripture and in church, we hear, the church or believers as being talked about in, a big group. Like we're kind of all lumped together as believers. We're all lumped together as sheep in a flock. But what David says is that he can lie down because he is free from fear of that social tension. That the Lord actually will intervene. He knows me, the one sheep out of the 99. And we all hopefully have heard of that parable. That this man had he left his 99 sheep to go out in search of the one that he couldn't find. So he knew that particular sheep intimately. The third aspect the third requirement for a sheep to feel the ability to lie down in comfort is that they need to experience a freedom from parasites. And this will actually come up maybe in the next day or maybe 2 days out. I can't remember, but we'll go into more detail and we'll explore a little bit more about what it means about a shepherd protecting us from parasites. But again, a new revelation for me is that sheep, especially during the summer months, are often tormented by insects and parasites. And so there's obviously like a treatment for that. And so good shepherds know when that kind of season is coming into play. We can maybe relate to this with mosquitoes. The summer's coming, so you want to make sure you've got your citronella. You want to make sure that you have your off bug spray handy. And so this sort of same care is taken by our shepherd to make sure that his sheep are covered in ointments and have gone through preventative treatments to make sure that they will not be pestered by parasites. And so the fourth requirement and final requirement for a sheep to lie down is that they have to experience freedom from hunger. A hungry sheep cannot rest. And this is kind of the importance of where the green pastures aspect comes into play. Because David doesn't just say, the Lord makes me lie down. The Lord is my shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures. And so you wonder why green pastures is even included in that phrase. Because obviously, for the fact that for a sheep to lie down is a big deal. But David goes on to say he makes me lie down in green pastures. Apparently sheep the author tells us that sheep do best in a kind of a dry, arid climate. And so that normally, is brown, it's rocky. It's not what you would imagine to be sort of this lush vegetation. But obviously, sheep require vegetation to feed on. So there's a really good quote from the book. It's on page 53. And it says, "Green pastures did not just happen by chance. Green pastures were the product of tremendous labor, time, and skill in land use. Green pastures were the result of clearing rough, rocky land, of tearing out brush and roots and stumps, of deep plowing and careful soil preparation, of seeding and planting special grains and legumes, of irrigating with water and husbanding the care of the crops of forage that would feed the flocks. And I think that's a great in-depth description of just how much work would go into creating a green pasture for your sheep in this particular climate. And so what David is saying is that not only am I not hungry, but I have a green pasture to lie down in. So that means that there's not just enough vegetation to feed on, but there's an abundance of vegetation. The author goes on page 53, a little bit further down the page. He says, quote, "No sight so satisfies the sheep owner as to see his flock well and quietly fed to repletion on rich green forage, able to lie down to rest, ruminate, and gain." So what a beautiful verbal picture or description of the fact that the shepherd does delight in seeing us content and resting and feeling safe and feeling assured. So a good shepherd creates an environment where his sheep feel safe, secure, and content to lie down. And most often, that environment is created simply by a shepherd's presence. So his flock feels safe from outside predators because he's there to fight for them. His flock feels secure in their acceptance within the flock because their master knows them individually. Like, how cool is that? His flock is free from worry about parasites or insects because the shepherd has a keen preventative eye on these troubles. And his flock is not hungry. In fact, they enjoy an abundance of green pasture because he has prepared the soil to provide the best vegetation possible. So as you think kind of about those 4 bullet points in the outline there, just think about how that could parallel to your own life, that you should feel safe because the Lord will fight for you, that you should feel secure in your acceptance in Christ because Christ knows you by name, like the Lord knows you by name. He knit you in your mother's womb. He's prepared the days of your life before you. That you can be free from worry about what may pester you or bother you or cause you harm in the future because his eye is on you. He is keenly watching, and that you don't have to go hungry, that you will not be in need, but you will also have not just enough but an abundance because the Lord has gone before us. Again, he has gone before us and prepared a green pasture. So this comes to the second part, which, he causes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. So obviously we talked about how sheep prefer a dry, arid climate, and you don't associate that with green, lush vegetation, and you certainly don't associate that with water. And since water is not easily accessible in this climate, it is up to the shepherd to find the best sources of water for his flock. And so the first kind of source is dew. So like the morning dew that's on the grass. This is obviously a rich source of pure, clean water. But this requires the shepherd to get up very early before the sun comes up and to encourage his flock to get up early and make sure that they can graze before the dew burns off the grass. The second way is that shepherds get their flock to water is that they will either, hike them through mountains or tough terrain to where they know there are streams or bodies of water. And oftentimes, if there's a large stream, the author tells us that they will dig out sort of caverns so that the water can pool in, or they can actually, bail the water from the stream into this kind of hole, so that it can be still, clean, pure water for his flock. The digging out allows the greatest benefit for a large number of sheep. But the interesting part that the author addresses about this is that, getting the sheep into this pool or this cavern that you've created is not often easy because the sheep are afraid to go into it because it's darker, because it seems like it may be disagreeable and a disagreeable environment to them. And so they have to kind of prod their sheep into it, knowing full well that what is in there is good for them and better for them than what is out. And so this brings up a rather lengthy quote, but I think it's one worth reading if you could bear with me. So he says on page 65, in the Christian life, exactly the same applies. Many of these places we may be led into will appear to us as dark, deep, dangerous, and somewhat disagreeable. But it simply must be remembered that He is there with us in it. He is very much at work in the situation. It is His energy, effort, and strength expended on my behalf that even in this deep, dark place is bound to produce a benefit for me. Suddenly, life starts to have significance. I discover I am the object of His special care and attention. Dignity and direction come into the events of my life, and I see them sorting themselves out into a definite pattern of usefulness. All this is refreshing, stimulating, invigorating. And my thirst for reality in life is assuaged, and I discover that I have found that satisfaction in my Master. I think that's an incredible passage that really addresses, kind of what I talked about yesterday for me personally, is that so often I judge the character of God based on what I feel like is going on in my own life. And here, this is a beautiful picture of one of those moments that the sheep may think, whoa, 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 I don't want to go down in that deep, dark hole, or I don't want to go over that rocky terrain. I don't think you have my best interests at heart. Are you sure you know what you're doing? And with all patience and diligence, the shepherd, gently prods the sheep along for their benefit. So, whenever things don't seem to make sense in my life, I must remember that the truth is that the Lord has gone before me, and that the Lord has my best interests at heart. And this was a great thing to end on, and so I wanted to kind of bold this last sentence in our outline. Good shepherds will urge their flock toward the best supply of water, even when some sheep would be content to drink from the muddy puddles along the way. And so I think of that in my own life, sometimes I think how often I probably stopped and thought that this muddy puddle was kind of the best thing there for me, and didn't listen to my Master's gentle prodding. And thankfully, sometimes He just picks me up and carries me, because we all need that. But anyways, hopefully you guys have enjoyed digging into verse 2 as much as I did. And let us be encouraged that we have a good shepherd, that we shall not want, that He causes us to lie down in safety and assurance in green pastures, and He constantly leads us beside quiet waters.